Okay, so in China this week, what's happening is COVID surge causing a lot of trouble with major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. A lot more people are getting infected, and supposedly this wave of Omicron surge, for some reason, and I have no idea why, it's a much more deadlier reaction in the Chinese populace than Western and other nations who's had Omicron. Partly because there's so many different substrains of Omicron, and some of them have different reactions depending on people, right? And also given the fact that China was under lockdown for 3 years, you probably expect different reactions if you haven't been exposed to it, right? Which leads to my first point today. China now, they're actually doing a lot of hires with priorities given to people, candidates for that particular job, to people who've been infected. In a school, they're looking for kitchen workers. So they want two chefs and 5 kitchen helpers. Okay, and it says here, those that have tested positive for Omicron have priorities for getting hired. And then this was back in July of this year. Says if you've been to quarantine camps or if you've tested positive, we will not hire you, okay? So why the back and forth and the sudden switch? Well, basically that's what I'm talking about. The society in China has been flipped upside down. Now you can go to work if you've tested positive, and now you can go to work if you are infected, but if you haven't been infected, you've tested negative, you're not allowed to work. And that's a situation that's actually real in China. Okay. So this is a notice given to, well, I guess it's other provinces given to help out Beijing with the latest COVID surge. And this is coming from one province called Shandong. And basically they're saying, if Beijing needs it, we'll send all of the medical staff available to help you. Okay? And then the United States has also said that they're willing to send in any help necessary to help China get through this wave of COVID. The funeral homes in and around Beijing have reached an all-time traffic jam, with many people that have unfortunately passed away waiting to be cremated, while the funeral homes are backlogged, waiting 5 to 6 days for them to get the cremation. And the reason is, according to one employee at the city's Dongfang Hospital, is attached to the University of Traditional Chinese Medicine via a social media post, says that the hospital is now having to wait 5 to 7 days before sending human remains for cremation. Due to a number of positive tests among funeral home employees over the past couple of days, there's a serious staff shortage, the post reads, and then due to the recent increase in death rate in Beijing, cremations are now being scheduled for 5 to 7 days' time. There's a serious issue with the backlog of human remains. Sounds very scary, right? The fact that funeral homes are now having to, well, first of all, they're short-staffed, and then also second, they have to burn so many bodies to the point where they're actually backlogged. What does that situation mean for us? Well, basically, it shows that a lot of these, by the way, are senior citizens, older people who have died either because of COVID or related symptoms triggered by COVID, right? People in Beijing, the streets, if you go right now, I was reading online, the streets are still empty. COVID measures are gone. People are still not going outside. People testing positive in some cities, they're forced to work, and then people who haven't tested positive, they're told to stay home. And then create a situation where the deaths, obviously because China's sudden opening of relaxing of the zero COVID measures caused a lot of trouble. There were medicine, fever drugs especially, out of stock. Hospitals were clogged up. You couldn't get IV drips, and you couldn't go to the hospital if you wanted. All the clinics you have to line up. A lot of elderly death, which we all know that COVID is more severe in the older population, and the mortality rate, so the number of people, or the percentage of death in the older range of people is much higher than that in the younger range, right? So it makes sense that a lot more people are dying. But the problem is, for 3 years, China has basically not told us anything real about the numbers in terms of COVID, right? If you consider the fact that they haven't told us initially, when the virus actually started to infect people in China, they didn't even tell us how severe the virus was, how many people it was killing in Wuhan. They didn't even lock international traveling, so they were allowing infected positive patients to continue to travel internationally. They didn't tell us it was a pandemic until like January. There's no evidence suggesting that the current case is the same Omicron as the one that has been spreading across the world. They don't tell us if there's any substrain differences in terms of the current infection where it's causing a lot of chaos in China versus the ones outside of China. And they're also not telling us how many people are dying, how many people are positive, and what the infection rate in major Chinese cities look like still to this day. For this to happen after it has opened up is very strange. So it makes me think, again, I don't have a conclusive evidence to suggest that this is the reason, but it makes me think that they're not telling us what exactly is killing people in China. They're also not telling us how many people have directly died because of COVID in China today versus the ones that caught COVID but triggered an existing condition, right? Because if you catch COVID, you have a high fever, and it's very common among the Chinese people today for some reason to have high fevers, cold, chills, and all of these things. The same effects are not happening to people outside of China, right? When you get Omicron, sometimes you don't even have symptoms. But in China, they're all getting high fevers. And these people, when they test positive, are they triggering an existing heart condition, existing respiratory condition? How did they die, right? I don't think they're telling us all of the truth, and they're not telling us what exactly is going on in the city. I don't know what the plan is, but I think the focus is this. I think it's the economy. Here's why. Okay, so according to this report by CNBC, China's retail sales shrank far more than expected, while industrial production disappoints. So after 3 years of zero COVID, one of the biggest problems China now faces is the lack of consumerism and consumer enthusiasm, as well as on the production side, a lack of production. If anything tells us here, it says retail sales fell by 5.9% in November from a year ago, worse than expectation for a decline of 3.7%. And industrial production grew by 2.2% in November from a year ago, missing Reuters' forecast of 3.6% increase, so about 1.4% lower than expected. And it tells us exactly why China is relaxing its COVID measures, or at least part of the major reasons, is that the economy is in such a bad condition. People are not spending. People don't have a desire to spend. People don't have money to spend. Merchants don't know what to produce. They don't know how to produce it under the existing condition. Now they're slowly having to reintroduce an economic plan that is somewhat of a mixture of recovery and forced production, right? And also forced consumerism. Based on a recent meeting that Xi Jinping and all of basically the top brass of the Communist Party attended, called the China Central Economic Work Conference, the number one task is for 2023 to expand domestic demand, with priority given to restoring and expanding consumption, including by supporting incomes. So the government, again, has to step in to basically say that we're going to have to force people to spend money somehow. According to Lori here, it says this is important because expanding domestic demand has earlier meant launching massive and wasteful construction stimulus. Supporting incomes and consumption could boost the economy and create jobs with much less of a carbon impact. The meeting's outcome tries to strike a balance between supporting investment, emphasizing high-quality development, and addressing financial risks. I don't see how China can do it yet, because given the fact that they're now facing a COVID surge, and if under lockdown they couldn't go out and spend money or go to their jobs even, now they have to deal with working while catching COVID, and that's a whole other beast to tackle, right? So I think the future is very, it's not a good sign for China to be this bad, because for one, it directly impacts the global economy, right? A lot of production is done in China, like what happened in Foxconn. When they stop working, Apple doesn't get their supplies. It in turn will export problems into the United States and Western nations. But then at the same time, this is all doings of the Chinese Communist Party, right? They're the ones who created this whole situation 3 years ago by politically demanding that China go into lockdown, and they never escaped that in the most critical periods of the Chinese economy. And then they continue to do so until, well, basically it's a little too late. doing what it needs to do to actually make people, their lives better. They're only doing this to kind of preserve the economy for the sake of keeping the regime's power in check, right? I don't think they care that much if the people can't eat. But of course, we also have the protests. Now people have tasted the success of a protest in China that didn't cause any violence, where the regime would roll down the tanks like they did in 1989. Perhaps now they think that protest works, so they'll continue to do it. But we'll be watching this. Before we go, though, I think there's something that I thought was very interesting because I always cover China, and given the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has been basically poisoning the world, and since the Cultural Revolution, they've actually destroyed a lot of what we know is traditional Chinese culture. I've actually been, basically I try to every year to watch a show called Shen Yun, and this is the website. I don't know if you've seen this, but they basically have a show that happens toward the United States every year, and I go with my family, take my wife with me as well. We go and see the show because I think it's actually genuinely trying to revive the Chinese culture, something that I don't even know much about, even though I was born in China and I came to the West to talk about these things that's happening in China. And I truly think that people, especially, Chinese people should watch this, but us here in the United States and the West should also watch this to realize what Chinese culture really is about. I think they're starting their tour. I'm going to be watching I believe in New York this year. And so it's a great show. I go literally every year. I'm not being paid by them to promote this or anything like that. But I do have a QR code. I asked for them to give me one so that you can scan. And then you'll be able to just pause the screen and then you can just scan it. And then this will show up. And then you can buy tickets. I don't know, maybe I'll see you there. I run into some people sometimes at events, but you can go and catch them there and enjoy the show. Honestly, I'll show you a little bit of the trailer actually. Let me here do this and play the trailer. It's a really wonderful show. It's pretty colorful and the dancers are very talented as well. And it showcases a story from how people came from the heavens down to China to create the 5,000 years of civilization. And it talks a lot about traditional values, which I think is missing a lot today. And it has a live orchestra. So I'd say you should watch this at least once in your life. So I'm David Zhang. This is State of Politics. Take care.